The rain had been falling since dawn, slicking the sidewalks and turning the small-town streets into mirrors of gray and gold light. In the heart of this quiet suburb, twin brothers Malik and Micah Johnson walked side by side, their matching black hoodies pulled low against the cold drizzle. At first glance, they were like any other high school seniors heading home, tall, lean eyes forward, but there was something in the way they carried themselves, a balance in their step, an unspoken rhythm that only years of martial arts training could forge. They had been raised on discipline, not ego. Their black belts weren't ornaments for bragging, but quiet reminders of patience, precision, and control. The street corner where they turned was a blind spot from the main road, the kind of place where shadows stretched long even at midday. That's where the voices came from, sharp and jagged against the muted hum of rain. "Well, look what we've got here," one called out, dripping with mockery. 3 figures stepped forward, blocking the path to boys their age and one older, all with that familiar smirk of people convinced they owned the space they stood on. The leader, a pale-faced boy with a cheap leather jacket, let his eyes rake up and down the twins like they were prey. "You boys lost. This isn't your side of town." Malik's jaw flexed, but he didn't stop walking. Micah's gaze was steady, almost calm, the same look he wore in sparring matches right before a round began. They had heard this tone before. In the cafeteria, on the basketball court, outside the corner store, the message was always the same: you don't belong. But today, the air felt heavier. The bullies stepped closer, closing the gap until Malik and Micah could smell the sour mix of cigarette smoke and arrogance on their breath. "Didn't you hear me?" the leader sneered, shoving a hand into Malik's chest. Malik didn't flinch. Micah shifted slightly, a barely noticeable movement that positioned him just enough to guard his brother's side. It wasn't fear that kept them still, it was the discipline drilled into them by their sensei since they were 8 years old. Only act when there is no other choice. The leader's friend laughed, circling like a hyena. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? Or are you just too scared to say anything?" His voice was a sneer, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of curiosity, maybe even unease, at how unmoved the twins seemed. Malik finally spoke, his voice low but clear. "We're just trying to get home. Move." He didn't raise his tone, but the weight behind those words was enough to still the rain for a heartbeat. The leader took it as a challenge. With a sudden shove, harder. This time, Malik stumbled back half a step. Micah's right foot slid forward almost instinctively, his weight settling, his breathing slowing. The moment hung like a knife between them, the bullies still thinking they were in control. The twins silently calculating the distance, the angles, the exits. They could end this in seconds, but something in them still held back, because once they moved, there would be no hiding what they were capable of. And once these boys knew, the whole town would know. A car passed at the far end of the street, its headlights sweeping over the standoff like a spotlight on a stage. For an instant, everyone froze. The rain drummed louder. The leader's smirk widened into something ugly. "All right," he said slowly. "Let's see if you're as tough as you look." He stepped forward again, fist tightening. Mika's eyes flicked to Malik. Not fear, not hesitation, but a silent question. Malik gave the smallest nod. The fight wasn't coming anymore. It was already here. The leader lunged first, his fist cutting through the damp air in a clumsy arc, meant to intimidate more than land clean. Malik didn't move until the very last fraction of a second, then his body shifted like water slipping past a rock. The punch missed. Momentum carrying the boy forward, just enough for Malik to place a palm against his chest and guide him off balance. It wasn't flashy, but it was controlled, deliberate, the way their sensei had taught them. Redirect, don't resist. The leader stumbled 2 steps before catching himself, confusion flashing across his face. His friends barked with forced laughter, the kind that tries to cover embarrassment. "You're gonna let him dance around you like that?" one of them jeered. But beneath the noise, Micah could hear the subtle quickening of their breathing, the first thread of doubt pulling at their confidence. The second bully didn't wait. He charged at Micah with the clumsy rush of someone who'd only ever fought in hallways and parking lots. Micah sidestepped, his hands still at his sides, letting the boy's own speed carry him past. With a precise step, Micah hooked his foot, lightly, and the bully's legs betrayed him. He hit the wet pavement with a splash, palms scraping against the grit. A low gasp escaped him, half from pain, half from disbelief. The older one, the tallest of the 3, narrowed his eyes. He had been standing back, watching, trying to read the twins. Now he stepped forward, voice low. "You think you're clever? You don't know who you're dealing with." His words carried weight, but Malik and Micah had heard heavier. They stood like statues in the drizzle, not flinching, not breaking eye contact. The leader's pride was bleeding out faster than the scrape on his friend's palm. His voice cracked into a shout. "Hold them." He swung again, more desperate this time. This time, Malik blocked a swift upward deflection that snapped his attacker's arm just high enough to open his ribs. Malik didn't strike though. Every muscle in his arms screamed for a release. He stepped back instead, forcing the leader to overextend again. "Stop playing with them," the older one growled, and this time he came in fast. His kick sliced toward Micah's side, sharper than the other's attempts. Micah caught it mid-swing, not with brute force, but with timing. His forearm met shin, redirecting, guiding the energy down into the puddle between them. The splash rose like applause in the otherwise tense street. That's when Malik heard it. The low growl of an approaching engine. Headlights turned the corner, and a rusty pickup rolled toward them. The bully's eyes flickered, not with fear, but with calculation. This was their ride. You're lucky, the leader spat, wiping rain from his cheek. Next time we finish this. He backed toward the truck, the others following. But the way they looked at the twins now had changed. Not mockery, not pity, but something heavier. They had seen just enough to know these weren't boys they could push around, but they hadn't seen enough to understand why. The truck door slammed, the engine roared, and the taillights bled red into the rain as they drove off. Malik and Micah didn't move until the street fell silent again. Then Malik exhaled slowly, his breath steaming in the cold. It's starting, he said. Micah nodded, eyes still on the corner where the truck disappeared. Yeah, he murmured. And they have no idea what they've walked into. The brothers continued home without looking back, their silhouettes fading into the mist, the sound of the rain swallowing the street once more. But somewhere, they both knew this wasn't over. The rain had thinned by the time Malik and Micah reached their street, the pavement still slick, glistening under the faint glow of porch lights. Their sneakers whispered against the wet ground as they walked in silence, neither eager to break. The fragile calm after what had happened, the hum of the confrontation still lingered in the air, not as adrenaline now, but as a low, steady vibration somewhere deep in their chests. Home was a 2-story brick house with peeling white trim, the kind their father always said had character. Inside, the faint aroma of their mother's stew clung to the air, warm and inviting. She was in the kitchen, hair wrapped in a faded scarf, ladling soup into bowls. You two took your time, she said without looking up. Long day at school? Yay, Malik replied, forcing a small smile. He hung his damp hoodie on the back of a chair, exchanging a quick glance with Micah. They had long agreed on a rule. Their mother didn't need to hear about every piece of ugliness they ran into on the streets, not unless it crossed a certain line. Tonight had come close, but not yet. Their father, a quiet man with work-worn hands, sat at the dining table reading a battered paperback. He looked up just long enough to nod in greeting, his eyes searching for anything unusual in their expressions. He'd been a boxer in his youth and had the kind of intuition that could smell trouble before it spoke. Micah could feel it, his father's gaze holding the question, what happened, but no one voiced it. Dinner was a slow, comfortable rhythm of clinking spoons and soft conversation. They talked about exams, about the local basketball team's losing streak, about how the heater in Malik's room still rattled like it was possessed. By the time the bowls were empty, the tension had loosened just enough for them to slip upstairs. Their shared bedroom was a cramped space with mismatched furniture, a small desk pushed against the window. On the wall hung a framed certificate from their dojo the day they both earned their black belts. Beneath it, a low shelf lined with their collection of martial arts manuals. Some so worn the spines had faded to pale ghosts of letters. Malik sat on the bed, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. They're not done, he said quietly. Micah didn't argue. I know. They saw enough to wonder, and wondering leads to trying again. Micah pulled his hoodie over his head, tossing it toward the chair so we'd be ready. The next morning, the sun rose behind a wall of pale clouds, casting a muted light over the town. At school, the atmosphere was different. Conversations paused when the twins passed. A few heads turned a little too quickly, eyes flickering with that blend of curiosity and gossip that spreads faster than fact. The bullies weren't in sight, but Malik could feel their presence in the subtle shift of the air, in the way certain hallways felt narrower, certain corners quieter. By lunch, the whispers had a shape. Someone had heard about a thing that happened near the alley. Someone else swore the Johnson twins moved like ninjas. Rumor inflated truth until it became its own creature. Malik and Micah ignored it, but each story added a layer to the inevitability of what was coming. Meanwhile, a mile across town, in a garage that smelled of motor oil and stale beer, the 3 bullies from the alley stood around an old workbench. The leader, Brent, nursed a split knuckle from his failed swing. His pride hurt worse. The older one, Kyle, leaned against the wall, arms crossed. We can't just let it go. They made us look stupid. They didn't make us look stupid, Brent snapped. They made us look weak. His words tasted bitter, and we're gonna fix that. How? The younger one, Dean asked. Brent's smile was slow and cold. We get back up. They think they can embarrass us in the street. Fine. Let's see how they do when it's not just 3-on-2. By Thursday, the storm was set. Malik and Micah didn't see the trap forming, but they felt its edges. After school, the air was sharper, the corridors emptier. When they stepped outside, the parking lot seemed to hum with some unseen energy. A few students lingered, watching. With feigned disinterest, they took the long route home, cutting behind the row of shuttered shops near the edge of town. It was quieter there, or should have been. Halfway down the block, they saw them. Not 3 this time. 7. The original bullies stood front and center, flanked by 4 more boys, some older, all bigger. Their shapes filled the narrow space between the brick walls. Well, well, Brent called out. voice dripping with mock amusement. The famous twins. Thought we'd give you a proper audience this time. Micah's eyes scanned the group. Spacing, stance, distance to the nearest exit. Malik's breath slowed, the way it always did before a match. Kyle stepped forward. No more games. You're gonna learn respect. The group fanned out, closing in. The smell of sweat and cheap cologne mixed with the damp scent of brick and asphalt. Rain hadn't touched this alley today, but the air felt heavy. Electric last. Chance, Malik said evenly. Walk away. They didn't. The first rush came fast. 2 boys at Malik, 1 at Micah. Malik pivoted, deflecting a wild punch, his foot snapping out just enough to clip a knee and send his attacker sprawling. Micah sidestepped his, catching a wrist mid-swing, and twisting just enough to send the boys stumbling sideways into the wall, but the numbers pressed in. Hands grabbed at fabric, arms swung from blind angles. Malik blocked, redirected, slipped past, every movement precise. Micah kept low, weaving between strikes. His counterattacks clean and controlled, never more force than necessary, but enough to make them hesitate. Brent came at Malik again, face twisted with frustration. This time Malik didn't just block, he swept Brent's leg, sending him crashing down hard. The sound echoed in the alley, followed by a sharp intake of breath from the onlookers at the far end. One of the newcomers grabbed Micah from behind, arms locking around his chest. Micah dropped his weight instantly, hooking his heel behind the boy's ankle and yanking him off balance. They hit the ground together, Micah rolling clear in one fluid motion. Within minutes, the tide shifted. The twins weren't just defending anymore, they were controlling the fight. Their movements weren't wild or angry. They were precise, efficient, and that precision was what broke the bully's nerve. One by one, they backed off, nursing bruises and swallowing pride. Breathing hard but steady, Malik and Micah stood in the center of the alley, eyes scanning for the next move. None came. The group began to retreat, muttering threats they no longer believed. Brent lingered, glaring. This isn't over, he spat, voice hoarse. Malik's gaze was steady. You're right, he said softly. It's not. The group disappeared into the fading light, leaving only the sound of their retreating footsteps. Micah turned to his brother, jaw set. We can't keep this in the shadows forever. Malik nodded slowly. Then maybe it's time we stop hiding who we are. The sun dipped behind the rooftops, shadows stretching long over the alley. The storm had only just begun. By morning, the fight was already a story. It wasn't just in the school, it was the school. Hallway chatter swelled with half-truths and wild exaggerations. Some swore Malik had flipped a kid over with one hand. Others claimed Micah had knocked out 3 at once. By first period, the whispers had reached the teachers, their sidelong glances carrying a mixture of suspicion and concern. Malik and Micah walked together as they always did, their pace measured, their expressions unreadable. The stares didn't faze them, but they noticed. They noticed the way some students stepped aside, creating an invisible lane for them to pass. They noticed the way others leaned into their friends, murmuring with sly smiles. It wasn't just students. Principal Hargrove, a tall man with a permanent crease in his brow, summoned them to his office before lunch. His desk was bare except for a neat stack of papers and a mug that read World's Best Boss, a gift, Malik assumed, from someone lying through their teeth. You two were involved in an incident yesterday, Hargrove began, his voice flat but edged. 7 students came forward this morning claiming you attacked them. Micah's jaw flexed. We defended ourselves. From 7 people, Hargrove raised a brow, clearly skeptical. Yes, Malik said, his tone even bay-cornered. Us in an alley. We didn't start it. We didn't want it. Hargrove leaned back, fingers steepled. Self-defense is one thing. What I'm hearing sounds excessive. Malik felt the heat rising under his collar but kept his voice level. We didn't hurt anyone more than we had to. We walked away. Hargrove studied them for a long moment. You're both suspended? For 3 days, while we look into this? His phrasing made it clear the decision had already been made. When they stepped out of the office, the news traveled faster than they did. By the time the final bell rang, everyone knew the Johnson twins had been sent home. Some saw it as proof of their guilt. Others saw it as confirmation of their myth. At home, the conversation wasn't gentle. Their father paced the living room, his voice low but heavy. You should have walked away before it started. They blocked us in, Malik said. There was no walking away. That's when you find another way, their father pressed. You don't give them a story to use against you. Their mother sat in silence, her fingers curling around the edge of the couch cushion. Are you hurt? She finally asked. No, Micah said. We're fine. Fine doesn't mean safe, she replied softly. That night, Malik lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The fights had always been small things. A shove here, a word there, but something about the last one felt like a shift. The bullies weren't just trying to scare them anymore. They were trying to prove something. And now, with the whole school buzzing, the twins were painted targets. 2 days later, the escalation came. Not in the form of fists, but in humiliation. On Friday morning, a video surfaced online, grainy but clear enough, of the alley fight. Someone had filmed it from a hidden angle. The clip caught the twins moving with precision, blocking and countering, controlling the fight with outrage. But without context, it looked almost like they were toying with the attackers. The comments were a wildfire. Damn, these guys are dangerous. Bet they think they're some kung fu movie heroes. 7-on-2, and they still won. Respect. Shouldn't even be allowed in school with skills like that. By noon, the video had thousands of views. By evening, it reached local forums where anonymous voices argued over whether the twins were heroes or a threat. Brent saw it too. Sitting in his truck, phone in hand, he watched the clip over and over, each replay stoking the burn in his chest. It wasn't just losing anymore, it was losing in front of an audience. He slammed the phone onto the passenger seat, muttering, "They think they're untouchable." That night, a brick hit the Johnsons' front porch. No note, no words, just the sound of shattering glass from the lantern it struck. Their father was at the door in seconds, scanning the street. Whoever did it was already gone, swallowed by the shadows. Malik stood behind him, fists tightening. Mika's gaze drifted down to the brick, to the faint smudge of oil and dirt across its side. "This ends," their father said, "one way or another." The next day, Malik and Micah walked into the dojo for the first time since the fight. Sensei Ito, a small, wiry man with decades of discipline in his posture, greeted them without surprise. "I hear you've been using your training," he said. "We defended ourselves." Micah replied. Sensei's eyes held theirs for a long moment. "A true martial artist wins before the fight begins. If you cannot avoid it, you must end it with the least harm possible." "We did," Malik said quietly. "Then you must be ready," Sensei replied, "because when people fear you, they will test you again and again until they understand what kind of man you are." By Monday, the next test arrived, not in an alley, not even in the streets. It came during lunch in the school cafeteria. Brent and Kyle approached their table, their voices loud enough for half the room to hear. "You think that video makes you some kind of heroes?" Brent sneered. Malik didn't answer. "You think you scared us?" Kyle added. Micah's eyes met theirs. "Steady." "No," he said. "I think you're still trying to convince yourselves you're not scared." A hush fell over the room. Brent's fists clenched. But this wasn't the alley. Too many witnesses. Too many phones. He leaned in close enough for only the twins to hear. "After school, old train yard. Bring both of you." They left without another word. Malik and Micah exchanged a look. Neither spoke, but they both knew this wasn't just another fight. The train yard was abandoned, secluded, and the way Brent said it, there would be more than just him and Kyle waiting. The bell rang, the hours crawled, and when the final dismissal came, the twins walked toward the edge of town, their footsteps steady, their shadows stretching long in the fading light. The storm was no longer gathering. It was here. The air in the cramped meeting room was thick with both tension and the scent of stale coffee. Folding chairs squeaked under the weight of those who sat forward, elbows on knees, eyes fixed on the man at the center. He was not dressed in a suit or anything fancy, just a faded button-down shirt and trousers that had clearly seen years of wear. But the way he held himself commanded the room. This was David Cole, the black janitor, whose voice had been silenced for so long, now standing before an audience that wasn't just hearing him, they were listening. Every pause in his speech seemed to hang in the air, forcing people to process the truths he had carried alone for years. He spoke about the neglect in the school system, about how corners were cut, about how complaints were buried in drawers instead of being addressed. His voice was deep, steady, but carried an undercurrent of emotion that made people lean closer without realizing. In the back, a few school board members sat with crossed arms, their faces unreadable. They had come expecting another aimless complaint, but this was something different. This was a man laying out facts, experiences, and names. It wasn't an outburst, it was an indictment. And as he spoke, murmurs began to ripple through the audience. People who had stayed silent for years started nodding, exchanging glances that said, "He's right." What David didn't know yet was that his words were already planting seeds in minds that had never considered taking action. Outside, the sound of rain against the window seemed to punctuate his sentences, as if the world itself was bearing witness. By the time he finished, there was no polite applause, there was a standing ovation. It wasn't the sound of people clapping for a speaker, it was the sound of people rallying behind a cause. By the following week, whispers had turned into conversations, and conversations into open demands. The school board could no longer ignore the public pressure, and the media had started circling. Like hawks, local reporters parked outside the building where board members met, hoping to catch a comment. The once ignored janitor was now the most sought-after voice in the city's education debate. David, however, didn't see himself as a hero. He still arrived early each morning to mop floors and empty trash bins, the scent of cleaning solution clinging to his hands. But there was a shift. Teachers who had once avoided eye contact now stopped him in the hallway to quietly thank him. Parents sent handwritten notes of support tucked into his locker. Some students even left little drawings on the custodial cart, depicting him as a caped figure standing in front of the school. But power does not yield easily. Behind closed doors, certain board members were working overtime to discredit him, digging into his past, twisting his words, hoping to turn public sentiment against him. Anonymous flyers began appearing in neighborhoods, suggesting he was stirring trouble for personal gain. Yet, every attempt to silence him seemed only to make his supporters louder. On a Thursday afternoon, the board scheduled an emergency meeting. David wasn't invited, but he showed up anyway, walking past the security desk with quiet confidence, holding a small notebook in his hand. When he entered the chamber, the air went still. Without waiting for permission, he walked to the microphone and began to speak not in anger, but in calm, undeniable truth. By the time he was done, the cameras had captured every word, and the footage would be on the evening news in every household. The walls that had stood for decades were beginning to crack.